I want to acknowledge the public officials who have joined today's call. We have representatives and senators from the Ohio General Assembly. We have representation from the Lieutenant Governor's office, from Governor's regional staff, and from local and state agencies. So really want to put a shout out to them for being interested in this topic, willing to spend some time on this call, and certainly look forward to the discussion later on. We will have time for questions, but in the meantime, please feel free to use the chat. You can raise your hand if you want to jump in. And with that, we will jump straight to our speaker. So as I mentioned, I'm excited to have representation from the National Skills Coalition today. Amanda Bergson-Shilcock is an expert in adult education, workforce policy, immigration, and digital literacy. I mentioned as we were just chatting before we opened the call that it's hard to be an expert in any one of those, but I can certainly vouch for the fact that she's got them all covered. As a senior fellow at the National Skills Coalition, she leads NSC's work in each of these areas, and throughout her career has worked with both state and federal policymakers, but also advocates and folks doing the work, and really have brought those conversations together to address the challenges faced by adult learners and job seekers. Her full bio can be found in the chat. And with that, I want to encourage you, you can stay on camera if you want, you can be off camera if you want, but I bring the questions and we'll turn it over to Amanda. Amanda, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. I'm really delighted to be here, and I'm so appreciative of you and the coalition for having created this space and this time for all of us to be connecting. It's just taking a second for the PowerPoint to click up here, so give it a second for that to update, and then we'll get started. Okay. So while we're waiting for the slides to update, just a little bit of context about what I'm going to share with you. As many of you may know, the Digital Equity Act that Congress passed as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law is something that will be sending tens of millions of dollars to Ohio to support digital equity over the next 5 years. And we see that I'm just wanting to see why it's taking so long for these slides to show up here. Let me make sure that folks can actually see and hear me.
Yep.
Okay.
We see you and hear you and see those slides. So I'm not sure.
All right, now I'm going to make the slides full screen. I'm not sure why that took so long. Doesn't usually do
just
that
for fun to keep us all on our toes.
Yeah, apparently. All right, so let me make this a full screen presentation. Okay. Goodness gracious. All right. So the Digital Equity Act that Congress passed in 2021 as part of the infrastructure bill is going to send millions of dollars to Ohio to support digital skills and to help Ohio residents get access to high-speed internet and digital devices. And in that context, because we know that over and over again, when people enroll in digital skill building classes, they say that they want to get a job or they want to get a better job. That was really the impetus for the research that I'm going to walk you through today from the National Skills Coalition. So let me just sort of give you the agenda for today's conversation. I'm going to share with you our research findings, walk you through what those findings mean for you as workforce advocates, adult educators, higher education and community college folks, broadband leaders, and then sort of give you some potential next steps in taking action on these issues. You will be getting a copy of these slides in your email following today's webinar, and they'll be posted on the Ohio Workforce Coalition website. So if you're the kind of person that likes to take notes, rest assured you don't have to scramble to try to note down everything on the slides. You will have them to refer to. You heard a little bit from Rebecca already about National Skills Coalition. We are a big tent bipartisan organization. We've been around a little over 20 years, and our entire focus is workforce development and education opportunities to ensure that people have access to high quality jobs and that businesses have access to a skilled workforce. So we hear a lot about the digital divide, and certainly the COVID pandemic really brought home to people that this wasn't an optional or sort of potential issue, but a very real and immediate one facing everyone. But the digital divide is not just about whether you have high-speed internet access or an up-to-date computer. It's very much also about the skills, right? It's often compared to, well, if I give you a car to drive and a highway to drive it on, that's not helpful unless you also have a driver's license, right? And some experience actually navigating in that car. And that's true for digital skills as well. And we know that many of the aspirations and dreams people have for themselves and their families, and that businesses have for their increased growth and success, really boil down to, I want to get a job, I want to get a better job, I want to find the skilled workforce I need so I can expand, so my business can grow. And that all requires skills. So we looked at millions of job ads that were collected initially by a firm called Lightcast, which some of you may have known as MZ Vernon Glass, and we collaborated with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta to do this research study. I'm obligated to tell you that the recommendations and conclusions in this report are National Skills Coalition's alone and should not be attributed to the Federal Reserve System or to the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. So let's talk about this data set. We looked at 43 million help wanted ads. And that makes this study different from other studies of digital skills. Generally speaking, when other studies have come out, they have been forward-looking projections. So kind of educated guesses about what people thought was going to happen in the future. Ours is a real-time look at the labor market, where we're actually looking at real help wanted ads posted by real employers and seeing which skills they are really looking for. So across these 43 million job ads, there were 15,000 distinct skills, and we hand-coded those skills according to whether they were definitely, likely, or not digital. And I'll explain what that looks like in just a minute. Of course, every job ad has a handful of skills associated with it. The average number is about 8 skills per job ad. So what do we mean by definitely digital skills? Well, before I get into that, here's the take-home message. 92% of all help wanted ads require a digital or likely digital skill. That is a huge number and really higher than we thought it was going to be when we did the study. Of that 92%, about half, or 47%, are jobs that require definitely digital skills. And those are things like, can you use Excel? Do you know the Python programming language? Are you comfortable working with a robot and doing robotics, or cobot, which is a collaborative robot? And then another 45% are likely digital. And that's things like bookkeeping, where, yes, it's still possible to do bookkeeping on paper and pencil with a ledger, but most people these days are using a product like QuickBooks and doing it electronically. And then, of course, there are still jobs in our society, many of them associated with elder care and child care, where there are manual labor tasks that are not digital. Looking at Ohio in particular, we see that the numbers are pretty close to the national average in terms of employers looking for digital skills. So nationally, 92% of all jobs require a likely digital skill. In Ohio, it's 89%. Nationally, 47% require a definitely digital skill. In Ohio, it's 44%. So pretty close to the national average there. So I'm going to share a bunch more data from the study. But before I do that, I want to make sure that we're kind of all on the same page by what we're thinking of when we hear the term digital skills, right? Because those of us who have jobs where we're kind of, sitting in an office or sitting in our home offices and working on a desktop computer and using office software, we sometimes kind of default to thinking of that when we're thinking of digital skills. But in fact, digital skills encompass a huge range of different types of technologies. So we interviewed one construction company that told us, our frontline construction workers need to be able to use mobile apps, typically 3 to 5 different mobile apps every day when they're out in the field. So they can snap a picture of something on a job site, submit an RFI to the general contractor on the building job, tell them, hey, I'm the plumber, I can't get my work done until the electrician gets their work done, here's what's going on. So they can log other kinds of safety issues or questions that folks may have, right? So that's a frontline construction worker, right? Somebody who's out in the field, who may not speak English as their first language, who may not necessarily have finished high school, but is now expected to be using this array of mobile apps. We see that cobots are huge, right? In Ohio, with the advanced manufacturing sector being so large, this is really a huge issue, right? Cobots are collaborative robots, and their price has dropped enormously in the past 5 years. So for example, some robots that used to cost $1 million now cost less than $200,000. And as the prices go down, employers are increasingly purchasing these and then having workers move into different roles. So we saw a case study from one advanced manufacturing company that is actually a tire recycling company. And they use a cobot to do the heavy sort of brutal part of breaking down tires. And the human worker is then supervising 3 cobots and doing the kind of more intellectual and fine motor skills work that a giant robot is not well equipped to do. We saw, of course, during the pandemic, a huge shift towards telehealth, and medical office receptionists and other staff who used to be checking patients in person are now often responsible for supporting both patients and doctors in figuring out their telehealth software, right? How do I log on for my appointment? What do I do if the specialist doesn't show up? Where's the patient portal? What does it mean to create a user account? All that stuff that didn't used to be part of their job descriptions, but is increasingly something that they're considered to be responsible for. In ag, we see a huge growth in the use of technology. John Deere tractors and combine harvesters now regularly come installed with onboard computers that are doing everything from GPS software to be able to guide the tractor in efficient sort of planting and operations, all the way to other computer-controlled fertilizer or irrigation techniques. And these things are out in the field, often with spotty or no internet access, and you have to be able to troubleshoot them effectively. If you can't, that $500,000 piece of equipment is going to be out in the fields not doing anything, right? And so we've talked to a number of community college folks and others who say, this is a huge part of our associates in applied science degrees. It's a huge part of some of our non-credit classes to make sure that folks who are going to be working on their family farms or otherwise are able to handle the technology that's such a big part of ag work today. We think of food processing plants as, cold, messy jobs. They are cold, messy jobs, but increasingly they're digital jobs. So in this picture, you can see these are workers who used to have a job that was mostly manual labor, where they were picking up these 40-pound boxes of frozen meat and moving them and putting them on pallets. Now the robot, the palletizer robot, is doing that. The person, their responsibility is to interact with the HMI, the human machine interface. And that's the screen that you see on the right-hand side of this slide here. And so this is a job that doesn't even necessarily require a high school diploma, that about 60 to 70% of the folks in these jobs are immigrants and refugees, so they're often English language learners. But the 62-year-old woman who is running the palletizer here has learned how to troubleshoot the robot, how to solve it when sometimes the robot thinks the box is empty because there's too much air in it and it won't lift it up and put it on the pallet, right? And so she has moved from a job that was mostly requiring her physical labor to a job that requires much more intellectual and digital skill engagement. You can also see there's two other pieces of digital technology in this picture, right? On the left-hand side, you see the woman holding the tablet device, and in the middle, on the blue table between them, you see the handheld scanner device. So again, frontline jobs, entry-level jobs, overwhelmingly still requiring digital skills. Warehouse and logistics workers, another example, right, where order picking software, inventory control, other tools, huge in warehousing these days. Augmented reality. Some of you may think you don't know what augmented reality is. If you've ever used a Snapchat filter or played Pokemon Go or used the IKEA app to see how furniture might look in your house before you buy it, then you've used augmented reality. Augmented reality is when you're aiming your smartphone or a tablet computer or another device at something in the real world, and you're seeing the real world item through the camera, but you're also seeing an animation or other digital design layered on top of it. Boeing and Airbus have been using augmented reality to help train aircraft technicians in creating and building aircraft engines and other aerospace manufacturing tasks, right? So this is increasingly a feature of AR is increasingly a feature of advanced manufacturing. So the kind of take-home message from all those examples I just walked you through is even entry-level positions now in our labor market overwhelmingly require digital skills. And in those 43 million job ads that we looked at, even jobs that called for workers with 0 to 2 years of experience overwhelmingly required digital skills. So again, half of all jobs requiring a definitely digital skill, 95% requiring a likely digital skill. Same goes for jobs that require a high school diploma or an associate's degree. Excuse me, those are circled here in yellow. Again, essentially half of all jobs requiring a definitely digital skill and virtually every job requiring a likely digital skill. So this is across the labor market. And it's also across the age spectrum. There's a misconception that, oh, this is just a problem that the retirement calendar is going to solve. You know, some older workers might not have technology skills, but younger workers are all digital natives and they'll be fine. That's wrong on both counts. First of all, it's wrong because many older workers are actually pretty savvy and adept with technology, and so we shouldn't underestimate them. But it's also wrong because a lot of younger workers have what's called fragmented knowledge. So fragmented knowledge means you're comfortable with some digital skills, but you're not comfortable with others. So maybe you're great at texting or making a social media video. That does not mean that you're great at creating a budget spreadsheet or navigating electronic medical records or working with robotics. And so younger workers, like workers of any age, need opportunities to build from the digital skills they have to the new digital skills they need. And they need to be able to do that in a contextualized real-world environment. So the same best practices that career technical education, adult education, and workforce development programs have been using for a long time of, okay, let's have you learn these skills in a real-world context. That works for digital skills too. But we can't make assumptions at either end of the age spectrum about who has skills and who needs to build skills. So this is the other really unequivocal finding of our report. Overwhelmingly, jobs that require digital skills pay better than jobs that don't. Moving from a job that requires no digital skills to a job that requires even one definitely digital skill, there's an average 23% increase in wages. Anybody would notice that kind of increase in their paycheck. That is a huge bump. And if I gave you the full version of this chart, which is in our long report, you would see a perfect stair step going up where jobs that require 3, 5, 7, 9 different digital skills, the salary keeps going up for each of those new levels of skill. And you might be thinking, yeah, but how many jobs really require 9 different digital skills? And the answer is 2.1 million in our study actually require 9 different digital skills. So not a small number, actually, nationwide. So of course, as workers are earning more, they're typically contributing more in terms of economic activity. We've put on the slide here examples of their contributions in federal and state tax revenue, but of course, there's kind of local economic spillover effects. Generally speaking, when people earn more, they spend more. So they're consuming locally in their communities. That money is circulating in the economy, causing greater economic activity in the areas where they live and where they work. So we often hear, oh, well, is this really just about large companies? No, overwhelmingly, even small businesses that are posting between 1 and 50 help wanted ads every year, the numbers are almost the same in terms of their demand for digital skills compared to businesses that are posting 500 or more job openings per year. But here's the big difference. The big difference is if you're a huge employer, you can have your own in-house digital skill building program, right? If you're Nationwide Insurance or Best Buy, the retailer, or your L'Oreal Cosmetics, you've got your own in-house program. If you're a smaller or mid-sized business, you are depending on the public workforce system, on the community college system, and on education and training partners in your community to help you build that talent pipeline of skilled workers, right? So this is a slide that really emphasizes the importance of public policies that to sort of support digital skill building for folks going to work in small and mid-sized businesses. And we see this demand across industries. I picked out a few here that I know are real priorities in Ohio, but we have the full list in our report. This is national data, but honestly, if you looked at this data for Ohio in particular, it wouldn't be that different. And you can see overwhelmingly, as you go from industry to industry, there's still really robust demand for digital skills. We also hear, oh, well, does this mean that folks just need, kind of basic office software and that sort of familiarity? And the answer is no. Workers need both foundational and industry-specific digital skills. They need that even more as they kind of go up the educational level. So you can see in this slide here, just under half of all jobs that require a high school diploma require industry-specific skills. That jumps to 2/3 as soon as you get to jobs that require an associate's degree, and it jumps to 4/5 when you get to the bachelor's degree level, right? And so industry-specific skills are really important. We cannot just stick people in a Microsoft Office training class and call it a day and say, now you have digital skills. That's not how this works. So let's zero in on some Ohio-specific data. And apologies for the outdated photo here. It was the best high-resolution version I could find. So sorry about that, but everything else was too grainy. So when we look at Ohio help wanted ads in particular, we see for sure there is a demand for that base of foundational digital skills. And these are really straightforward skills that you might think a lot of people have. But we interviewed some employers and heard some really eye-opening stories about different foundational skills and assumptions that employers had made. We talked to one trucking company that had shifted during the pandemic to a mobile app system for payroll and for logging hours. Trucking is very federally regulated. There are things that drivers have to do in order to keep their company in compliance. And when they switched over, they found that their supervisors were spending a huge amount of time on the phone with their drivers troubleshooting app problems. And they realized that they had just assumed, well, all our drivers have smartphones, so they'll be fine with this. And in fact, that was not the case, right? Just because you can use your smartphone to send a text message or to do online banking does not mean that you can just automatically hit the ground running with industry-specific software. We heard another story from a major Fortune 100 company that is 2 years into trying to transition from paper paychecks to electronic pay stubs. And they can't finalize the switchover because so much of their frontline workforce is not literate in English, hasn't yet figured out how to do two-factor authentication and create sophisticated passwords so that they can log in through the payroll system online and access their electronic pay stubs, right? So this is costing businesses time and money, because there's often an assumption that because we all carry around these smartphones with us all the time, that we're adept in using those smartphones to do everything that we might need to do in the workplace. And that's not always the case. We also see some industry-specific skills that have some really, really strong demand in Ohio, right? I'll just lift up a few of them here. I'm sure many of these are not a surprise to you. Of course, electronic medical records show up over and over again in the healthcare sector, radiologic technology, telehealth, manufacturing. We see a huge demand for ERP software, so enterprise resource planning software that is coming from SAP or Oracle. Big demand around robotics. That's probably not a surprise either. Programmable logic controller, PLC, that's been around for a while, but it's continuing to increase in terms of its popularity. Retail, big demand for retail analytics and consumer goods software. I didn't see that one coming. That was a bit of a surprise to me. Yardi software, which is property management software, and in the food services and accommodations, so sort of hotels and restaurants, we see a lot of demand for folks familiar with Empower human resources software. So that gives you a sense of some of the industry-specific skills that just show up over and over again in Ohio. So again, I know I'm flashing pretty quickly through a bunch of statistics and slides here. You will have this slide deck to refer back to after today's webinar. You'll be getting a PDF version of it. So if you're scrambling to take notes, you don't have to worry about hustling to do that. You will have the slides. Okay. So I want to show you one more slide here. Now, this slide it illustrates two things. First of all, it illustrates that job ads are imperfect, right? So this is showing across every occupation in Ohio, not just industry, but occupation, about half require a definitely digital skill. But across particular occupations, the demand for digital skills is really high. Now, you may look at this and burst out laughing and say, how on earth can software developer and engineer say 95% instead of saying 100%? And the answer to that is help wanted ads are imperfect and messy. And sometimes the aggregating software or other materials that are gathering this information either don't recognize the name of a software tool that's being required, or sometimes the employer doesn't actually explicitly list things because they assume it's super obvious that everyone should have a particular skill. And we definitely saw that happen with a number of different occupations, not just in Ohio, but across many states in this project. So I've just given you a quick rundown of a whole bunch of data from our study and sort of the implications for Ohio in particular. I want to take a few minutes now to sort of walk through, okay, so you have all this information, what can you do with it? Because I'm working for a policy organization, I'm going to focus on public policy. I do want to flag that if you're on this call and you are a frontline workforce board or Ohio Means Job Center staff, if you are running an adult education program, a career technical education program at a community college, if you want to talk about the practice of this and sort of how do you do this in the classroom and how do you do it at the program level, you should feel free to contact me offline and I can connect you to some folks who are doing really smart work on this in this area. But from my organization's perspective, we're going to focus on the policy piece. Okay. So I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that Ohio is going to be getting millions of dollars through the Digital Equity Act and billions of dollars through the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, or BEAD program. Both of those came about as part of the federal infrastructure bill that Congress passed about a year ago. And both of those, Ohio is working right now to create 5-year plans for how that money will be spent. So our first recommendation is to actually make sure that that Digital Equity Act and BEAD funding goes in part to digital skills training, right? There's a lot of things Ohio can spend that money on, and they're all important. Making sure broadband gets to people's houses, actually laying that fiber, training the broadband workforce, making sure that people have up-to-date digital devices. But digital skills are a really important piece of the puzzle. And we hope you as workforce advocates are participating in public meetings, helping to inform this 5-year plan. And that 5-year plan will be the roadmap for the next millions of dollars in formula funding that will come to Ohio at the end of this year and beginning of 2024, and then over the next few years. We also recommend that you take our findings from our Digital Skills Divide report and you juxtapose that with census data for Ohio or for your region or county within Ohio to really look at closing equity gaps. So what do I mean by that? The Digital Equity Act outlines 8 covered populations that Ohio is responsible for serving with regard to closing digital skill divides. Those populations include low-income folks below 150% of poverty, rural residents, veterans, people with disabilities, people with limited English proficiency and limited literacy skills, aging folks over the age of 60, folks who are people of color. So it's a long list, and many of you who are running workforce or education programs are probably serving these folks already as job seekers, as adult learners. So taking the census data for your region or for your state as a whole and putting it next to our digital skills research data can help you identify, are there particular industries where workers of color are concentrated, or rural workers or veterans? And if you targeted digital skill building at those industries, could you help close equity gaps for rural residents or veterans or people of color? We did this for 2 states as a way of illustrating how it's possible to tackle this. We did it for North Carolina and for Illinois. And that data is in the appendix to our published report. So it's publicly available. You can see how we did it for other states, and you can take publicly available census data and do it yourself for Ohio. We're also more than happy to chat with folks offline if you want to do that and sort of talk about how we approached it and how you can do it. And then the second or third recommendation we have is really around making sure that state labor and workforce officials and education officials are coordinating with broadband officials, right? In most states, the broadband office is new and it's newly staffed. So the broadband office is kind of drinking from a fire hose in that they're generally a fairly newly created office the last few years, and they're trying to staff up really rapidly to handle these billions of dollars in federal BEAD money and Digital Equity Act money that's about to come flowing through their doors. And because of that, broadband folks typically don't necessarily have much of a background in workforce development or education. And so it's really incumbent on workforce advocates and educators to make sure that they're getting in front of their state broadband leaders to make sure that there's coordination happening between those state agencies and between program providers on the ground. Happy to talk more about this in the Q&A if folks want to go deeper. We also recommend embedding digital skills very deliberately in other state workforce investments. What do I mean by that? Well, basically, employers and program providers are often pretty conservative. If they don't see something that says they're definitely allowed to spend the money on X, they're going to assume they might not be allowed to spend the money on X. So we worked with one state recently that was putting out a $10 million workplace literacy grant solicitation for employers. Now, this was around foundational skills for frontline workers, for incumbent workers, and the grant solicitation was going out to employers, right? And we encouraged them, and they did, explicitly call out digital skills as an allowable activity, right? So yes, you can teach ESL classes. Yes, you can teach high school equivalency classes. Yes, you can help your frontline workers learn math if that's a problem for them and they need it for their job, but you can also help them build digital skills. That's the kind of thing where explicitly calling out digital skills as allowable under existing state policies can be really beneficial for workers and businesses alike. Of course, many of you are already engaged in industry sector partnerships that bring together multiple employers in the same industry with education and training partners. Earlier research that I conducted for National Skills Coalition really affirmed that these partnerships, in addition to being generally effective for job training, they are effective for digital skills in particular. And so that's really gratifying, right? To know that this kind of workable model that we've used before works well as we're working on technology skills. So that takes me through the end of my questions here, or the end of my recommendations here, rather. We're going to open things up for questions. While we do that, I'm just going to flag that when you get this slide deck, there are some additional slides at the end that are just resource slides. So I'm just going to briefly show those to you. My contact information, so you can be in touch with me directly, a link to our full report, which I know Carter has also dropped into the chat. So thank you, Carter, for being so quick on that. Our Digital Equity Act 101 fact sheet, if you want to understand what money is coming to Ohio and when. Our Digital Equity Act and BEAD recommendations, which Ohio folks helped us develop. Shout out to Ohio folks for helping inform those recommendations, and many thanks. National Skills Coalition has a set of digital equity principles that we hope you'll sign on to. It's not endorsing any particular legislation. It doesn't count as lobbying. It's just a set of principles, and we'd love to have your sign-ons. And then some past publications of ours on digital skills. And we warmly invite you to steal our charts and graphs and use them in your own proposals, in your own presentations. Just credit National Skills Coalition, but feel free to go ahead and use these materials. And then you heard from Rebecca already. In May, we have our Skills Summit in Washington, D.C. We're going to have a special briefing on digital skills policy, and we hope you can join us. So let me stop sharing slides here, and we can open up for questions.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting, and it's exciting to have this level of data at our fingertips. So appreciate the work that you've put into it. I certainly have a whole bunch of questions, but we have a couple in the chat that we'll start off with. As far as industry recognized credentials, is there any sort of, as you're traveling across the country, what are you seeing as far as generalized digital skill foundational credentials?
We are in the Wild West right now. There are a lot of vendor-specific credentials for different software products. Most employers either have never heard of those credentials or don't particularly care about them. There are a lot of employers who say they want workers with digital skills, but then when you ask them, well, what would help you know if the person had the skills you want? They say, I don't know. Is there a credential? I'm not sure. So we are very much in the early stages of this. I will say, if you're not already familiar with the nonprofit Credential Engine, they have a nice website called credentialfinder.org that helps you learn about a huge variety of industry recognized credentials, degrees, certificates, certifications, you name it, badges. And so I really encourage you to check out their website. I will also say there's a really excellent project going on right now called Digital Resilience in the American Workforce, or DRAW. It is being headed up by a nonprofit based in Boston called World Education and some other nonprofit partners. And the DRAW project has published some really handy resources for the field about, well, how do we measure digital skills? Well, what credentials are associated with digital skills? And they are not working for any particular software vendor or company, right? So they're not going to tell you Google career certificates are the best or CompTIA certifications are the best. So they are very useful as a resource. And I encourage you to check out the DRAW website and read some of their resources. I wish I could tell you that there was like a agreed upon standard. We're just not there yet. I will say that for foundational or basic digital skills, a lot of states are using the North Star Digital Literacy Assessment, which was developed by a nonprofit in Minnesota called Literacy Minnesota. It is a very baseline, basic digital assessment. It is not meant to capture industry-specific skills, but it is very handy for what it is. And because it's a nonprofit and they're very mission-oriented, they're wonderful to work with. So I would encourage folks to just check out their website, which is literally just digitalliteracy.assessment.org. And pick up the phone and give them a call if that's not something you're already familiar with and you think you might want to be.
Thank you. Thank you. Great resources. So the second question that was in the chat is around, are employers more willing to accept individuals with criminal justice involvement or other traditional barriers if they see the digital skills are present? And I guess with that, I wanted to tack on kind of that looking at skills-based hiring and knowing that using skills-based approaches to education and hiring, you can increase diversity and inclusion, but how do you do that in a way that isn't replacing one proxy for another, if you will, when it comes to credentials? So would love to hear your thoughts in that space.
Yeah. Okay. So let me tell you what we know and what we don't know. I don't know, and I haven't seen formal research saying whether employers are more willing to forgive convictions if the applicant has digital skills. I don't have that data. What I can tell you is there are oftentimes a good opportunity for helping incarcerated folks when there is a pain point that employers are experiencing. So heard a terrific story from Louisiana the other day. There's a Northern Louisiana community college system that partnered with their sheriff to run a fiber optics technician training program for currently incarcerated folks. And it was such a success that the sheriff came and spoke at the graduation. The employer came and spoke at the graduation. And it was a beautiful example of, okay, you're incarcerated right now. We're going to help you build this in-demand skill that Louisiana really needs you to have. We're going to need fiber optics technicians because we've got all this billions of dollars in broadband money that's coming to the state to lay this new fiber. And it was really kind of a win-win-win situation. So definitely there are these kind of one-off examples. The other example I'll share is from the city of Louisville in Kentucky. So Louisville is partnering with their community and technical college system. Now I can't remember actually whether it's a community college or the University of Louisville. They are running a program for folks who are currently incarcerated in local jails, not even state prisons, local jails, to help them build digital skills. But because their local jail doesn't allow internet access, they are using Ubuntu operating system, which is developed for developing countries where broadband access is spotty or non-existent, and helping incarcerated folks build digital skills while they're still incarcerated. And they've done everything from, sort of practical workplace oriented things to helping people build music beats because they were really excited about music. So that's for currently incarcerated. And the Digital Equity Act, those covered populations that I talked about, currently incarcerated folks are included. Formerly incarcerated folks are not explicitly called out as a covered population in the Digital Equity Act. But we know because formerly incarcerated folks are disproportionately likely to be living in poverty, to be people of color, to be people with disabilities. They are covered under all those other covered populations in the law. And so I do think there is a really nice opportunity for folks who are working in corrections education, for folks who are working in reentry programs, to be very deliberate in helping formerly incarcerated folks and currently incarcerated folks to learn these skills, both for their own well-being, so they can navigate life when they get outside, but also because so many of these skills are in demand. And I would love if somebody wants to do that research study that we don't yet have results on, but haven't yet seen that.
Yes, I had $1 for every research idea I had,
I know, right?
it would be
Not enough time in the day.
exactly. So I do have a question. I heard something on the radio a couple days ago, and you talked about alternative reality. I think that's what you said. And I
Augmented
hadn't thought about
reality,
it with
yeah.
the examples. It was super helpful, but you hear about AI, AR, all of these different advancements, and this question of how will it disrupt professional workers, and what does it mean for those of us? Like, there is out there a digital career coaching tool that was developed by a global consulting firm. So what does it mean for the workforce space? Have you heard folks talking about that?
So it's interesting. There's several different threads of conversation going on in the field right now. There's the kind of techno-utopian conversation. So the people who are excited and think technology can fix everything and technology is a silver bullet. And if I just make a chat bot that asks the right questions, then I can help every person find the right job and we don't need to have humans involved at all. I am not a subscriber to that philosophy, but that idea is out there. And there are funders who are in love with that idea, and there are policymakers who are in love with that idea. And so my sort of response to that idea is ask the same skeptical questions you would ask of any new program model. Right? What's the research base? What do we know from workers themselves about what they would find most useful? What do we know in terms of outcomes, right? So those are questions to ask. There's a second set of conversations that are happening that I think are even more important, right? And that is whether sort of the most marginalized community members are often the ones who first understand the potential harms of new technologies. And there are a series of Black women scientists who have been examining artificial intelligence for quite some time now and flagging potentially very serious problems. So I'll give you a couple of very quick examples. So there's a woman named Safiya Noble. There's another scientist named Ruha Benjamin, another named Dr. Timnit Gebru. They've all written on these issues from different angles. Why does this matter for the workforce field? Well, somebody used the ChatGPT artificial intelligence tool the other day to ask about predicting career paths for their imaginary son and daughter. And ChatGPT wrote a beautiful little essay predicting a future career path for the son as a doctor and the daughter as a teacher. Now, there's no shame in being a teacher. I think it's an amazing profession. My parents are educators. But that is an example of an artificial intelligence training set that was trained on real world data that disproportionately said men are doctors and women are teachers. And so when it was asked to write an imaginary story about future careers for an imaginary son and daughter, it was like, oh, men are doctors, women are teachers. This is the world. And when you train artificial intelligence on existing real world data that has existing real world biases, the artificial intelligence is just, it's been called, sort of money laundering for bias, right? It's just washing it and making bias be, laundered and replicated. We see it also with the excitement about self-driving cars. A number of self-driving cars are not good at recognizing pedestrians with more melanin in their skin because they've been trained on data sets of photos of light-skinned people. That's a life or death consequence, right? So when we think about that, that's another related issue. I see you have some other questions coming in, and I want to get to those.
So for sure, we have a question from a human factor scientist looking at the integration. I think, her question just popped up of human machine teaming. Are there plans to try and break down the digital skills term into more specific skills like monitoring, automation, programming, and so on?
Yeah, so the short answer is we use the term digital skills in our report because we thought it would be simple and easy for the public to understand. But underneath that umbrella are a huge variety. I think I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, there are 15,000 distinct skills that we looked at for this report. And a huge variety of those skills are digital skills, and some of them are very, very specific skills, and some of them are pretty general. So yes, there are a lot of efforts, and I would say the deeper you go into any particular industry training program. So for example, if you're running a career technical education program on, an associate's in applied science in the ag industry, you might be having folks learn about, sensor technology that's used in greenhouses and, the tractor technology that I was talking about earlier. So what a digital skill looks like is quite distinct, not only based on occupation and industry, but other variables. And there are definitely folks kind of digging into those details. We simplified it for the purposes of this study because we were trying to help communicate this broad impact across industries.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's see. I saw another question. Ron, Scott, can you talk a little bit about the Internet of, I'm assuming that's Internet of Things.
Yeah.
It feels like a way to help someone with a bunch of different, or help someone in a bunch of different industries to develop a skill.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on with industrial Internet of Things devices. I was just talking to a gentleman in North Carolina who told me he works for the North Carolina State University Extension Program. And he told me for a lot of the farmers they work with, they're using industrial Internet of Things devices to monitor their grain silos and to measure the pressure and the gases and the moisture. Because of course, if the grain gets too wet, it'll get moldy. If the grain gets too dry because it's sold by weight, then the farmer won't make as much money. And so the sensor helps monitor what's going on with the grain, and then the farmer can turn on the fan or whatever they need to do, right? So industrial Internet of Things is showing up in a huge range of industries right now. I'm not sure whether training an industrial Internet of Things is something you're going to do more generically and work across industries, or whether it's something where people are going to do it more specific to the industry and the application of the industrial Internet of Things device in that industry. I think you'd probably have to talk to folks at the community college level to hear how they're operationalizing that. But we are absolutely seeing some, I think, much more interesting breakthroughs in industrial Internet of Things than we are seeing in the consumer area. I know everybody's excited about, like, my refrigerator can talk to my smartphone, but it's unclear that my refrigerator talking to my smartphone is something that most of the American public wants or cares about. On the other hand, industrial Internet of Things devices like the farm one I was just describing, it's much easier to see the immediate application. And capitalism being capitalism, if it's going to save money, people are going to be like, let's try it out.
Absolutely. Well, I don't want my refrigerator talking to anyone. It will get me in trouble. But it also raises privacy questions. And what are we doing? We're collecting all of this data from people without compensating them, without getting consent. I mean, there's a lot to talk about. So we have about 2 minutes left in our main session. We are then holding a special Q&A with Amanda for public officials. So if you are with state or local government or, excuse me, related agencies, you will be invited to stick around and continue the Q&A. But I wanted to just make room for any last questions from the core group.
Yeah, and I see a comment from Molly here, and I'll just briefly say I saw a really cool study from North Carolina. 37% of employers had not yet mapped the digital skills associated with different jobs in their companies. So some employers are just not even there yet, and they know they need them. And another part of the survey illustrated that they had demand for them, but they hadn't even mapped exactly which specific skills were associated with which specific jobs. And then I see the comment from Derek about tech cred. I will say I haven't done an exhaustive study of it. My impression is generally positive. It certainly hits a lot of the key points that National Skills Coalition would tend to recommend for state policies, but I haven't seen outcome data, so I don't have specific comments on it.
Yeah, and then there's one comment from Mary Ellen, and Mary Ellen, I think you jumped on after I said thank you to the folks who've been with the coalition for the whole 15 years. So thanks for always raising this voice of people who are living in Appalachian areas of Ohio who not only are digital skills important, but access, affordability, and a whole cluster of digital divide related issues that we need to be continuing to think about and advocating around. So thank you for raising that. Any comments there, Amanda?
Yeah, so the U.S. Department, there are 3 huge investments in broadband that are happening for the U.S. government right now. One through the U.S. Department of Commerce through the BEAD money that I was talking about earlier. There's other money specific to Appalachia that's coming through the Department of Agriculture, and actually the Department of Treasury is also doing some investment. So if you're not already on the Broadband USA email newsletter from the U.S. Commerce Department, I would encourage you to just Google Broadband USA or go to internetforall.gov and sign up for their newsletter. But yeah, the feds are definitely, there is some Appalachian specific dollars going out for broadband access that there's a strong bipartisan commitment on the part of both the administration and Congress to get this done. So I'm optimistic, but happy to chat offline if folks want to have more details about that.
Okay, well, it is 2:01. Thank you so much for being with us today and for joining in the discussion around digital skills and what they will mean in Ohio. We are, again, going to hold a special Q&A session for any interested public officials who would like to stick around and continue the conversation with Amanda. Anyone else is certainly ready to, or welcome to take off now. Look for the slides and the recording in your inbox, and please do consider becoming a member of the Ohio Workforce Coalition. We'd love to have you and continue this conversation.